Hi everyone, and welcome to this Climate Salad Lunch and Learn session on shaping market policy around real-time smart meter data access. My name is Alison Bird and I am a program manager here at Climate Salad. I'm also joined by Audrey, our head of impact. I am one of the newer kids on the block here, having recently joined Climate Salad from a startup ethical super fund. And while I won't even attempt to fill Charlotte's shoes, I do look forward to connecting and learning more about you and the work that you do, including through these lunch and learn sessions. Before we dive in, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, which of course will be different for all of us. For me, that's the Minjungbal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal people joining us today. And as we talk about the use of natural resources in Australia, I do think it's always important to acknowledge that we can only enjoy them today because of the way that the land and waterways have been cared for tens of thousands of years and continue to be cared for by our First Nations people. And if you'd like to share where you're tuning in from today, please pop it in the chat. In a moment, I'm going to pass it over to Mitch Grande from the Australian Energy Market Commission, or AEMC. Mitch is a policy advisor there, and he's going to set the scene and open up a discussion around the AEMC's metering review. There will be an opportunity to engage, share feedback, and ask questions. So do pop any questions in the chat as you go, or put up your virtual hand, and we can facilitate bringing you off mute to ask that question. So Mitch, over to you.
Thank you, Alison. Thanks for a great introduction. Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself. So I think I've got some slides to share. As Alison mentioned, there's opportunity for open discussion, and we've also got a couple of polls just to, get individual views along the way. So look out for those as we move through. Before I share the slides, I think it would be good just for me to set the expectation of what I'm really trying to get out of a lunch and learn like this, and the context of it, outside of what's written in the slides. We're approaching the end of a review process at the Australian Energy Market Commission, and a proposal such as this has kind of come in towards the end of the process, a bit of a eureka moment. So I think off the top, I just wanted to acknowledge that early engagement's always better, and engaging with startups of various scales like yourselves is always tricky. So I appreciate your time, making time in your day to engage on a topic like this, and hope you can appreciate where it's at in the sort of review cycle. My intention is to sort of capture the sentiment of what we've got here, and the views that are shared either as a collective or by some individuals now or later via the polls, in order to incorporate that feedback into what will be our final report, essentially along the lines of energy startups think this about this idea. And so I think from there'll be a good opportunity through subsequent stages to continue this type of engagement, really leaning on Climate Salad as an ecosystem partner to connect us to people like you, because along with my earlier recognition, we don't engage startups enough, and it's something that I would really like to start changing at the Commission and get those routines more structured. And so really appreciate your time and Climate Salad for helping whip this all together. So just for the benefit of everyone who may or may not be in the know of the regulatory landscape, I've got a couple of slides which kind of aim to get everyone on the same page. So there's a group of market bodies, the market operator, the market commission, where I'm at, and the energy regulator, who all come together to look after the electricity rules, the gas rules, the retail rules, in order to constantly check review and make new rules that contribute to consumers' long-term interest. And we do that in support of the Energy Security Board, established by then COAG, and energy ministers through their new Cabinet Reform Committee. I think as a little more context to what the AEMC does, we primarily have three functions. One's that advisory role, but the other two are the more day-to-day policy work. And one of those is changing the rules, like I said, but another is running reviews. So looking comprehensively at an issue with a bit more room to breathe. And that process is where we're at today with, I'll go into the smart metering regulatory framework, or the metering services regulatory framework. And just as a point of clarity, this metering services framework doesn't apply in Victoria, and of course doesn't apply in WA. So it's New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Tassie, and the ACT. There was a decision back in 2010 on again in 2015 to make metering services provided by competitive entities, as opposed to, say, being a part of the distribution network and their capital and operational expenditures. Victoria, the one I left out there, decided to keep it with the Victorian DNSPs, doing more of a competitive procurement process, which satisfied the government of the day's objectives. So with that out of the way, what are we trying to do with this review? Early on in the process, we got a bunch of stakeholders together and workshopped an objective and a problem statement to guide what we're actually trying to solve, or actually how we should look at the regulatory framework. And the objective we came up with is to enable the rollout of appropriately capable smart metering, so that consumers can contribute to an efficient energy system and receive the maximum amount of benefits possible. Why isn't that the baseline? Why isn't that the framework today? It's because the current arrangements just aren't efficiently and effectively realising some of the key benefits in the metering tech, and primarily that's in the way that they are rolled out, the way that they are installed, and then the value-added services you can pull from what is a pretty basic piece of technology of edge computing.
Mitch, can I just jump in for a second? Jeff's just asked, how does it work for the NT?
Yeah, so the NT can look to opt in or opt out of electricity rules. I'm not sure of the status of them opting into these rules. I'm gonna lean on the side that they didn't choose to make the metering services competitive, and therefore are provided by their vertically integrated energy companies. But I would have to go back and double check that, Jeff. Pretty sure they're not, but yeah. So as I said, we're looking at different components of the review, how the meters are rolled out, how they're installed, and how do we get value out of the tech, the capability that's there. That last work stream is the one that I've been leading for almost 3 years now. And the goal that we set for this work stream is to unlock all the further benefits that are possible, with this particular work stream focusing on real-time data. Most data is quite historical, ex post, 24 hours in arrears, whatever you want to call it. That probably isn't going to be sufficient for the energy system we're moving into. So how do we unlock that real-time space and push the innovation towards that? And the purpose all along the way has been to involve stakeholders in those developments, and in that co-designed way inform where we are trying to land. And so, yeah, I'll bring it back to today. As I said at the top, I did want to be clear about the expectation and recognise where we're at in the process and why we're bringing you in sort of later. I'll start with the risk, the bottom one on this one. We need to much better understand and incorporate all stakeholders' views, all participants in the energy system and everyone who's contributing to it. And we need to understand the full breadth of opportunities and potential impacts that could come out of a proposal like this. Climate Salad have very kindly and willingly helped put this together because I think there is a really strong opportunity for startups, primarily software-based, those moving into advanced intelligence. There's a real opportunity to use real-time data as a key contributor to that growth. That's, my hypothesis. But also that better access to real-time smart meter data contributes to that triple win that Climate Salad have, which is to decarbonise energy in this instance, promote innovation and grow the country's productivity. So I think there's an opportunity there. There's also, process risk that we aren't engaging as broadly as we can, regardless of where we are in the piece. But I do want to focus in on that opportunity. And so we have our first poll, if we could, Audrey.
Yes, it should come online for everyone. So if you could take a minute to just answer the whole question.
So if you can't see the poll for any reason, the question is, would opening access to real-time meter data support innovation in the climate tech ecosystem? And you've got the option of yes, definitely, yes, somewhat, no, not really, and no, definitely not. And I'm seeing so far lots of yes, definitelys and a couple of yes, somewhat. So that's good news, I think, Mitch, and hopefully some of the feedback that you were hoping to hear.
Yeah, definitely very interested in those results. They're pretty top heavy. I wouldn't mind seeing some distribution, but there is something about this space which it needs to look very forward. It needs to look into the future, and the future is, I think, increasingly real time, especially in the energy system. And, if the kit's there, smart meters are there, and the capabilities are available, shouldn't customers get bang for buck for that data is kind of why I would say yes, definitely. So yeah, it's a good starting point that we do sort of see an opportunity here.
Mitch, are you happy? I've got another question from another Jeff. Are you happy to kind of answer questions as we go through?
Yes, I'm just not very good at seeing both. So
perfect. Yep, that's okay. That's why I'm here. So Jeff Andrews, are you happy to pop your video on and come off mute to ask your question? We'd love to hear from you if you're there.
Okay, you should be able to see me and hear me now.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff.
So my question's around the implicit assumption that the value in the meter is purely for one-way communication from the customer to the network and not the other way. So is there any consideration about the value of real-time pricing information, control of vehicle to grid, control of water heaters, etc., as part of the meter rollout?
It's a good question. There's a couple of ways I could answer that. I think the long and the short of it is we think that the capability is there for two-way communications. A lot of the difficulties are actually in the data sharing or the access arrangement level rather than the capability. So I think once we have that capability there, it's on particularly the Commission as the custodian of those data sharing arrangements, to ensure that the communication is between a smart meter and an EV charger, or a smart meter and a home energy management system, and vice versa. There's also some interesting things around, to use a technical term, dynamic operating envelopes, and whether the smart meter can receive those instructions and play a bit of a traffic controller role. That has kind of been a live debate throughout the review and other processes which I've participated on. I think all of it is about getting the capability in there and not assuming that if we build it, real-time pricing and two-way communications will come, but ensuring that access level is fair, reasonable, and consistent.
Thank you.
Any others? Cool. Again, I just wanted to ensure that everyone is kind of on the same page of the regulatory landscape. I did give an overview at the beginning where it kind of does and doesn't apply in different states, but this is more the nitty-gritty of what the regulatory framework sets out. So again, that decision in 2015 was that the retailer become financially responsible for smart metering services. And it's their job to ensure a working smart meter is at every one of their customers' premise where the customer requests it, or the old meter, the legacy meter, has failed. So they have to appoint a metering coordinator, who are commercial entities, independent entities of the retailer, and they carry out that active responsibility. So they're the one doing the backhaul, the data, the installation, the scheduling of the installation, coming back for repairs over the airways firmware. And they don't do that alone. They have the choice to subcontract with a metering provider to do all that on-site installation work, and a data provider who usually is very focused on ensuring that settlement data is delivered to AEMO in the timeframes that they set so that the market can settle. I think one thing to note here with this regulatory landscape is that's also the data flow. So by virtue of setting the responsibilities, that's the way data goes from A to B. And the grey lines, which connect the customer and connect the DNSP with the customer, they're the data lines. There's nothing outside of that, and there's nothing that really encourages, especially from a regulatory perspective, the open, fair, reasonable sharing with that data throughout the landscape. And it's kind of, leading to this thesis that we might need to sort of crack open the access arrangements and ensure the sharing is fair and reasonable. But before we get to that proposal, do have another poll. Have you seen this before? Have you interacted with this landscape? Have you tried either from a data perspective or a metering perspective?
And Mitch, while people are completing that poll, Chris has asked the question, who's responsible for the dynamic operating envelope you mentioned earlier in respect to that regulatory landscape?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because dynamic operating envelopes are a bit of an innovation, as in the rules don't specifically, title them or give them a responsibility, but they're absolutely the responsibility of the distribution network service provider in their connection agreement with the customer. So they are ultimately responsible for calculating the envelope, delivering that signal to the customer, whether that's the customer's own device, a smart meter, or otherwise. And that's kind of where it ends. We're still figuring out that landscape, and it's a very good one to, I think, get involved with, because there's a lot of potential value for customers in dynamic operating envelopes and getting them right. So I think all that sort of occurs outside of the rules as well. So that's my soapbox. Has everyone?
Yeah,
Is
it's looking almost 50-50 on the poll.
Interesting. Okay.
Sorry, 57% have said yes, they have tried interacting before, and 43% have said no.
It's interesting. I do wonder the makeup a bit. You know, whether you're a business to business customer startup, sorry, or a business to customer startup as well. You know, what the core business is of the startup. Some people I've spoken to just try to avoid this whole thing altogether, and that's, I think, a fair enough strategy. But sometimes, particularly due to the data sharing arrangements and the flow of data I explained, you kind of have to get involved, which is, I think, another difficulty.
Mitch, are you happy to hear from anybody to see how they've tried interacting and the experiences that they've had, or you're not quite up for that today?
Well, I was going to put in a double barrel question, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't confident in at least half or at least 8 people saying yes. But yeah, I'm happy to open the floor to anyone who has had or tried to have experience with this part.
Yeah, is there anybody that wants to step forward and put their hand on their heart and say, yes, I have tried interacting with the regulatory landscape before, and maybe give Mitch a sense of your experience? See Stu there, or David, I can see you both came off mute. Anybody else want to? Oh, David, lovely. That would be great if you want to take yourself off mute and tell us a story.
Yeah, sure. So I'm based in Victoria, where we've had sort of the ubiquitous smart meters for quite a while now. And I think I started almost 10 years ago now wanting to create an energy startup, which is a little bit different to my current one. But I started off with, hey, we've all got these smart meters. Couldn't we do more intelligent things with boosting solar self-consumption, like turning air conditioners on, heaters and that kind of stuff? All the smart meters in Victoria have this thing called Zigbee Smart Energy, which should allow you to, I've probably got a device around here somewhere that allows you to get the real-time data straight off the smart meter. You should be able to plug in, EV chargers, do dynamic control. All the hardware to do that stuff was there, long time ago now. But then rubber met road, or I got through the front door of PowerCore and talked to them and say, okay, how do I enroll this device? And they're like, oh, we have to accredit it. It takes 6 months. It'll be, $50,000, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I can't do that. That's never going to happen. Eventually, they opened it up a little bit. You can enroll your own kind of Zigbee devices and do that kind of stuff. Again, no one's really taken it up. There were lots of pilots, but people are installing things like Power Pals that just look at the blinking light on your smart meter. It's supposed to be a smart meter, not this dumb meter. And then talking to, groups interacting with the consumer data, right? And coming up again and again where it's just too hard. I'm just going to install my own meter. And we deal with watches along those lines. And you end up with this smart meter being sidelined, and we end up paying for a 4G SIM connection just so that we can do what we want to do.
Yeah.
It's easier to pay an electrician than to deal with all that crap. And you're seeing it now with virtual power plants as well, that it's so risky dealing with customer Wi-Fi, and they change NBN provider and the Wi-Fi details change over, that the providers of these batteries and solar systems are saying, I'm just not going to deal with that crap. I'm going to pay Telstra, $5 a month for a SIM because I cannot trust the customer, and I can't use, the data kind of platform of the smart meter, even if it could technically do what I want to do. That's just an angry rant. It's not in many ways, but this is kind of 10 years. And even now, while I wouldn't touch that infrastructure, I wouldn't build a business on that infrastructure because it's just too hard. It's too expensive. Even with the CDR now, where things are looking fantastic and the government's spent, $200 million or something like that, I'm still at the point where I can't afford to interact with that ecosystem as a startup. It's just too expensive. It's too risky. So this is just, I guess, it's what you wanted, the startup voice, right? If, for an AGL or a scale up, A couple $100,000 here and there to go through compliance processes is fine. For a startup, it's just you'd look the other way and find workarounds. And that's kind of been my experience today.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a rant because I would validate that experience because I've heard it time and time again. It's what's kind of given me the confidence to try and do something in this space, chart a way forward, put a light on the hill. I think there are a lot of pitfalls in your experience that we do have to learn from, particularly around protocols, authentication, ease of access, ease of connection, and understanding, the quite rational economic trade-off that you do have to make, and a lot of people make, kind of regardless of size, that, well, I can't use that meter, so I'm just going to duplicate it. That's might be a good trade-off because you don't have to go through the accreditation or pay a large access fee. That's a customer paying for 2 meters, and it's this technical redundancy that we're going to be building in layer upon layer into our electricity network that just shouldn't be there. We should just have fair, reasonable, open access. There's all the benefits that could come from enabling that access, but also avoiding duplication costs. That's a real easy one in an ECBA. Sorry, David, I did rant myself.
No, absolutely. It's there's 2 parts for it. I mean, I think the risk landscape as it applies to startups is sometimes disproportionate. It's not that we should get special treatment. It's that things like the Zigbee Smart Energy Protocol, for example, is so locked down that if I were to take an off-the-shelf product and work within that ecosystem, from a data privacy and compliance point of view, it should really be quite low risk. There's customer sort of issues there, but I think especially dealing with DNSPs, they're so scared. Like everything in their mindset is about avoiding those fees, about it's all downside. It's like dealing with a bank. It's all downside and no upside, and therefore it's really hard to get them to engage. So I think an organizational and governance point of view, that means you have to move that away from the DNSPs and potentially to the retailers, and create sort of mandates for innovation and data access. If someone asks you, you can't just say no.
Yeah.
And I think the other side of it is things like, the emergency shutoff of, solar in South Australia, the same thing being done in Queensland via ripple control for for EV chargers, and, EV chargers more generally. It's just a technical nightmare. These kind of ad hoc solutions, we're way, way, way behind. And even large organizations are rolling out their own infrastructure to get around this because they couldn't access the proper technical solution that was kind of there. So again, I don't know the solution there, but I guess maybe there's a role for like a C4net or a government-backed incubator to say, this is a technology platform that no one should have to implement again and again and again from scratch. So, that would be the only thing, that maybe with Climate Cell and other groups, there should be an organization that coaches you through this process, because everyone's implementing the same thing. Nobody should be kind of up against it. And maybe that's some way of bringing down the ecosystem costs and making it a little bit more accessible to, the smaller startups that don't have the capital to kind of navigate these, these roadblocks.
Thanks, David. And Sam's seconding that as well, that the CDR entry just being too expensive, at least 12,000 for the first year of access, up to 40K, if not higher, if not more at the higher end.
Yeah, I got pinged that just to do the legal compliance work, let alone the actual technical implementation. So yeah, it's not an easy process.
Can I just jump in with a quick comment on this slide? Yeah, that's sort of where the question started. I think that blue line between the retailer and the metering coordinator is a very important one, particularly with several retailers having set up their own metering coordinator. The ability for any disruptive company to get access to large volumes of metering data, which is ultimately held by the metering data providers, is next to zero. And that is despite the efforts made with regards to consumer data rights. Anyone who thinks the consumer data rights is the solution hasn't actually tried to utilise that capability so far. And I hold out very little hope that it will be the answer to the problem. We need to step away fairly rapidly from this idea that the householder treats the metering consumption data as personal private information. That's a ludicrous concept, quite frankly. The data should be owned by the industry. Obviously, you need to do something to protect consumers from misuse of that data. But if you took the exact opposite starting point and said that data should be freely accessible to whomever wants to access it, that would greatly accelerate the deployment of new technologies in this country. But we don't have that mechanism at the moment. And as long as you've got that dark blue line there between the retailer and the metering coordinator who controls the MP and the MDP, you're never going to see a change.
Thank you, David. I think, it is an important blue line for many reasons, and being on this metering review for better part of 3 years has really shown that. As I said at the start about where we're at in our review process and why we're kind of coming to this kind of proposal now is we had a bit of a eureka moment with the publication of the European Union's Data Act, which addresses, I think, the very issue you're talking about, David, where a manufacturer and a service off-taker close the loop, and anyone who wants to get access, they can claim intellectual property, trade secrets, anything. So the EU Data Act, forms the basis of this proposal. It's almost copying it word for word, and we're very open about that. But its main intention is to crack that hold on manufacturer ownership, and as I said, couch it in fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms, so that a startup does get the same entitlements to data that a retailer does, because the data holder is not able to discriminate against one or the other. So hopefully that aligns with your experience. I did also, maybe in the open discussion, want to come to the CDR. It's often the first question I get, well, we got the CDR, why are we doing this? And beside the, way it's been implemented and the roadmap that it has, I really do want to stress that these are kind of complementary. A real-time continuous stream to data to, say, optimize someone's export, totally different from the actions and functions that the CDR enable. But they have to kind of come together, for you to market an offer to a customer. The CDR provides you with that longitudinal view and the details on which you can, market that customer. But this will give you, I think, the operational side, that you're able to have full visibility of what's occurring at the connection point. Do need to make it a lot clearer that they are complementary, and we're not trying to create a workaround or anything like that. Any more in the chat or anything?
Unless you want to hear a rant about the fossil gas metering data as well, I think we're probably good to move on.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone's input. Keep those questions coming through.
Yeah. Okey-doke. So what's going to change? The proposal, as I just mentioned, is heavily based on the EU Data Act, which primarily just gives users access. Like that's its first or second provision, besides defining what words it's using and how. The customer should, by way of a simple request, get access to data that is free of direct charge, without delay, and continuously and in real time. So what we would be doing through this proposal, if it were to go ahead, is formalise that loop, that new blue line in the regulatory framework. There is also in the EU Data Act a big focus on third-party access. I think a lot of people, similar to first asking about the consumer data right and how do they work together, their first thing is, well, I don't want to sit on my phone and watch my load curve go up and down, or I don't want to see, I don't want to be sitting there watching it. That's kind of not the point. The point is giving access to either a machine that the customer owns or an agent that provides the customer with a platform to ingest that data in real time in order to provide the customer with a service, insights, optimizations, or to contribute to a greater good, because data can be aggregated and leveled up into an output greater than the sum of its parts. We'd, through this proposal, be formalising that the customer can give that real-time access to a third party of their choosing. The third party might have to have some higher duties than what they do today, so that the metering coordinators can honour the customer's request in good faith, but they've got to be fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. We have another poll. 2 polls?
Another 2.
Okay, great. I lost it for a bit. So, yeah, the main thing we want to understand here is if the change of the regulatory landscape changed, how might it affect your growth, your startup as a business or otherwise? And again, this is just kind of changing the flow of data, putting it in the sort of decision of the customer, and ensuring that the participants under our remit honour that request.
So we've got a split here between it would have a positive impact at 67% and that more neutral look, I guess, of that it would have both positive and negative impacts.
Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure that I'd get any takers on that, both positive and negative. So if anyone feels comfortable speaking to that answer, why it would have both positive and negative impacts, I'd love to hear about that. I think from the discussion we have an understanding of how, in general terms, it might have a positive impact, but this dual impact, I think, is really interesting to me. Anyone willing and able?
Yeah, does anyone want to share if they're seeing that both positive and negative impacts?
Yeah, sure. So look, it's Chris here. I'm from Discover Energy, so we're a small startup retailer. And look, I guess I'm looking at this and going, okay, this is good. I like access to real-time data. So there's the positive. But to actually implement this, I don't know how this is going to work.
Yeah.
There's obviously got to be costs somewhere. Metering providers don't currently give us real-time data as a retailer.
Yeah.
They're going to have to implement new systems. Who recovers that cost? Does that go to the customer? But does the customer's agent recover those costs on behalf? Do they charge the customer? Yeah, I don't know how. That's what I'm positive and negative. That's my thought process.
No, that's great. I think implementation of this, some people have put to me, could be really simple, but I don't think so. But in terms of those new and additional costs, a lot of the changes that we would be recommending would try and incentivize as much as possible the least cost outcome. When the meter already has an efficient way to deliver that data, say locally The marginal costs of that are low, but there are new and additional costs. I don't want to limit that, but we're trying to, I think, as much as possible, ensure that participants are able to find the least cost outcome. We will have a lot to say about cost recovery in the final report. It's getting pretty long, so I don't want to, wait to read that. But the EU Data Act deals with cost recovery in a number of ways. One being that the manufacturer just needs to incorporate those costs of business in the sale price of their device, which, as you said, under current retail contracts might be additional, but there is also opportunity to charge or receive fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory compensation from third parties. At this point in time, the Commission is minded to not have a direct charge to the customer. Previous iterations of this policy thought about it more as an optional extra, like a carbon offset that you could opt into and pay it a little bit on top of your bill. We've kind of changed our mind on that the customer itself should not receive a direct charge. But no, I appreciate the positive and negative impacts there.
Got a couple of other hands up as well. We've got David there. If you want to jump on, David.
Sure. So yeah, the downside would be, comparing to like the CDR, where once you're in the CDR, the scope applies to all your IT systems, unless you put up some pretty hard barriers, which means that once you're in, and you're on a compliance train that has costs associated with it, and you're kind of stuck with it, whether it's giving you benefit or not. And I think the fear would be that at the moment, you could sit back and say, well, if this program works fantastically, I'll opt into it, and when it makes sense from a business point of view. And if it doesn't, I'll do my own workaround for that. And I guess the fear with the CDR is that there's been indications, well, this isn't fear, this is a reasonable thing for the government to do, that they're going to start outlawing things like screen scraping, which is really sketchy in the context of banks, but other channels of data access will be kind of closed down to push organizations through, and if they're not applicable to startups due to the scale and kind of regulatory burden, then potentially reduce competition, or the startups that survive end up with this burden on their balance sheet and their cash flow that they have to live with, even if the business case isn't there. So that's me being worried, and then the downside kind of risks, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That is a new one for me. The Commission hasn't contemplated what happens with bypass devices and stuff as a result of a proposal like this, but I'm not sure if we would restrict it. I think a lot of this change is ensuring that the meter is treated the same as an inverter or another device, and vice versa. So sort of leveling the ability for a customer to access data from the meter if they've got it, inverter if they've got it, or what have you, rather than trying to funnel it down. But definitely going to take note of that as an implementation consideration. Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. I've also got a question from Mitch O'Neill. Mitch, if you want to jump in, thanks.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Mitch. I think especially from a party that installs hardware like solar and DER, like obviously the pros are that this can lower costs in that, maybe we're installing less hardware because we don't install that export meter, or we can get that real-time data feed from the cloud potentially for other reasons. But the cost potentially, and this really depends on how it's implemented, is around that extra complexity. Now you've got this extra party that you're getting this data feed from. If it's real time, you might need it for operational purposes. And so you kind of don't want downtime. Like our getting metering data back is a very kind of asynchronous process at the moment. Like you see Amber customers being like, where's my real-time data? And it's like 3 days behind because the metering coordinator had problems. Or if there's I had a smart meter that had bad comms sometimes, like it worked 60% of the time under certain scenarios. And so, if we're now using this real-time feed from this other party and it breaks a lot and works in ways we don't expect, then kind of maintaining that is tricky. And if there's more customer support calls because that data is not as good as well, it could kind of increase that operational complexity and costs.
It's really handy, Mitch, really practical. Creating another spoke in the wheel can always be hard, so I appreciate that. Have a think about how to incorporate that as well in the write-up. Next poll,
Yeah, so the next poll is, how does a potential change in access to real-time data affect your data needs? So it would increase my data needs, it would decrease my data needs, it would have no impact on my data needs, or not sure at this stage. A lot of I'm not sure at this stage by the looks of it, though there is a little bit of a spread coming through on the would increase or decrease, but certainly a heavy emphasis on the I'm not sure at the moment.
Yeah. I'm pretty happy with that result, to be honest. I think, like I said at the top, earlier engagement's always better. So it's hard to be sure when you're reacting to something that you literally just got spoken to about. So
how does that differ maybe from what you've seen so far? Has there been like some stronger, it would definitely increase or it would decrease based on what you've seen previously?
Yeah, I'd say similar but less I'm not sures. I think just the real-time frontier is potentially really complicated, and so regardless of whether this is the best, most properly implemented regulation, how you integrate real-time data and what you can do with it is really hard to predict. So I think that's pretty comparable. I think this might have been in the, can't remember now, sorry. But increasing my data needs, as in I'm going to need more data, I think is I think an interesting one. So just by getting a real-time stream from the meter, you're going to need other data, and so it's going to, essentially make you more data hungry rather than just ingesting what comes out of the meter, and being able to provide something like that. Yeah, that's definitely on people's radar. Would have liked a little bit more that it would decrease people's data needs, but that's, I think, part and parcel.
Yeah, maybe some of those people who are not sure at the moment, maybe it would go either way after a bit of reflection as well.
Yeah. All right. Pretty happy with where we are for time. So I think if anyone wants to explain why they're not sure, besides the fact that it's all new and you're just reacting to it, and as Alison said, taking the time to reflect on it, happy to sort of move to a more open format where anyone can kind of just speak their mind.
Yeah, if you've got any comments or any other questions as well, I can see Chris is saying, yes, real-time could replace the need for FCAS metering requirements, depending on what real-time means. Anyone else with any questions or comments that they want to jump in, pop your hand up, or just come off mute if you'd like to. We can organise that.
I'd just say that I really liked the emphasis on a customer and a customer's agent being able to one time provide some degree of assurance that, yes, they want this machine to have access to their data, and then a reliable data stream being available to them. I think you can build a business around that.
Thanks, David. Mick.
Yeah, just a question. I think it was sort of touched on a little bit, but in terms of microgrids and distributed energy management resources, how does that change, and how, as the grid evolves, how did that change data?
Yeah, I think part of the hypothesis has been that these emerging trends where we're trying to localize constraints and losses and solve them at the source, and as well how customers self-optimize are really driven by the need to respond instantaneously because the clouds move quite randomly and sporadically, and so you need to be able to respond in kind. So I see it as a pulling force on the data needs, but I think there's a lot to be figured out in how integrated it is essentially. So is it actually solving a data need, or is it creating a data need by, energy management systems or the need to self-optimize increases? Regulatory standards.
Sorry, technical standards there. That was meant to be, I think.
Yeah. Yep. Good one. There's a lot of standards out there. I've been involved in the DER standard space as separate to this data sharing stuff, so very aware of the landscape. We'll have a lot to say about it in the final report, especially as it relates to interoperability. But I think we're minded to be a bit more outcomes focused for the other types of standards, noting that there's pretty significant uptake of those other standards anyway. But standards is a tricky space. Probably gonna stop sharing actually. Maybe we can get a bit Brady Bunch. That was pretty much it I had content-wise anyway. There's an appendix of about 4 slides, which we've provided to other reference groups in the past, which details a bit more of the proposal, a couple of layers down. So we'll be happy to share that after the fact.
Yeah, great. And so, good question, Chris. I was just going to ask that as well. What's the timing? What are the next steps?
Yeah. So this 3 and a bit year review is wrapping up in the end of August. So we will be publishing our final report that provides direction to the market as well as back to ourselves to change rules. So this real-time data component will be one of many in a reform package that'll need to get picked up rather quickly, because I guess one thing I haven't spoken about is our intention to accelerate the deployment of smart meters, which requires a suite of regulatory changes. So all that needs to get going pretty quickly. So we publish in August, get a rule change back to us, hopefully before the end of the year, so we can kick that off, and then changes will be debated for pretty much all of 2024.
Great. And is there any other way from here that, like members of our community are able to pass on feedback formally or otherwise? Yeah,
so formal submissions for the review component are done for since we're publishing. But once the rule change starts up, everyone is welcome to submit rule change submissions. So in response to a consultation paper or a draft determination on or any other papers that we come up with in between. I'm thinking of ways to help startups, because I know most don't always carry a reg manager. In the past, I've provided essentially a Word doc for you to fill out responses rather than navigating it all. So there's things we could do to make that easier. And as I said, disseminating that through Climate Salad as a partner or what have you, are great ways to get formally engaged. But we have a very open door policy here. So if you ever want to talk about energy issues outside of this, engaging with us informally is always an option, and we do love it. It's where you get to learn a lot from people who are actually at the face of this. So formally through submissions in the next stage of the process, informally always. So reaching out to myself or reaching out to us via our website in order to connect with the appropriate people in the organisation. Would strongly encourage it if you've got stuff to talk about.
Great. And what's the best way for people to do that for you? LinkedIn, email?
I am on LinkedIn. I think I'll, with the pack, have my email address. So email's always good as well. So yeah, really appreciate that.
Perfect. Any final questions, final thoughts just before we wrap up? Mitch, hopefully you'll get those to us shortly. We'll be able to share that with the community.
Yeah.
Perfect. And so I can see a last comment here from Sam. As an early stage SaaS product, I can't see a downside to more data as long as there is minimum for data quality, and that quality is incrementally improving over time.
Thanks, Sam. I'll incorporate that in kind. I think it's important consideration for reliable growth and building a product. So appreciate that.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Mitch, for your time today. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, sharing your questions, comments and thoughts and your opinions in the polls. Really, really appreciated. So thanks, everybody, for your time today.